When the person you love most decides to leave you, what will you do? Will you choose to face life positively, or will you hide your true feelings and do something bad to numb yourself? In the classic American TV series Breaking Bad spin-off Better Call Saul, the protagonist Jimmy clearly chose the latter. Jimmy and Kim got married in May 2004. In just 2 months, they experienced the most terrible things in their lives, and they also burdened themselves with a guilty conscience. Because of this, Kim decided to leave Jimmy, as she felt that being together was like poison. After Kim left, Jimmy officially transformed into Saul Goodman, continuing his work as a criminal defense attorney at his new law firm. Saul was a little off his game this day because Kim had handed him the divorce papers. The date on them was October 2004, which meant their marriage lasted only about 5 months. Although Saul was a bit unwilling, he forced himself to remain calm and sign the divorce papers. He asked Kim why she chose to go to Florida. Kim hesitated for a moment and was about to explain when Jimmy interrupted. Jimmy felt that explanations no longer mattered. He believed Kim would regret not getting a share of the Sandpiper Crossing settlement money, which was a huge sum. Upon hearing this, Kim wanted to retort, but she held back and swallowed her words. She said she would go to the Civil Affairs office to submit the application tomorrow. Jimmy then acted indifferent and wished Kim a happy life. Kim stayed there for a moment, as if waiting for the old Jimmy to come back, but in the end, she left in helpless disappointment.
Hey, sweet cheeks, who do we got next? Let's make some money.
Emilio Koyama?
This is Emilio, Crazy Eight's cousin from Breaking Bad and Jesse's partner in crime for many years. This also indicates that Saul has started dealing with criminals again. When Kim walked out of the law office, it began to rain heavily in Albuquerque, which was rare. She took out a cigarette to ease her mind. As the camera slowly zoomed in, a scruffy-looking young man came up to her.
Hey, yo! Hey, bump one of those?
Such familiar catchphrases. This person was none other than Jesse, who accompanied Emilio, and also the second male lead in Breaking Bad. From the timeline of the plot, it was about 4 years before Walter was diagnosed with lung cancer. Jesse recognized Kim because she had defended his friend Combo in the past. Combo was killed by a child in Breaking Bad. The RV that Walter and Jesse used to make illegal substances was stolen by Combo from his mom. Jesse thought Kim was very professional for getting Combo off the hook for theft. This time, he came because his brother was in serious trouble and needed a professional lawyer to get him out. Emilio came here because of the ads Saul put out. Jesse felt that a lawyer who made funny ads wasn't very reliable, so he wanted to ask Kim what kind of person Saul was. Kim took a deep breath and didn't give a direct answer.
When I knew him, he was.
This time Kim really left Jimmy, and her life turned into a black and white film. Ordinary and monotonous. Even her beautiful blonde hair was dyed a plain black. She found a simple, honest boyfriend and got a job at a company that manufactures sprinklers. She wanted to use this ordinary job and life to hide her brilliance. Saul's choice was the exact opposite of Kim's. He continued to use his cleverness to walk the line between law and morality. Advertising was Saul's forte. Saul first appeared in the audience's sight in the 8th episode of the 2nd season of Breaking Bad. The opening ad was a hint.
I better call Saul!
I was out partying, minding my own business.
You are under arrest.
I'd better call Saul.
Hi, I'm Saul Goodman. Did you know that you have rights? The Constitution says you do, and so do I. I believe that until proven guilty, every man, woman, and child in this country is innocent. And that's why I fight for you, Albuquerque!
At this time, the combination of Walter and Jesse had already been formed. Badger, who was helping them sell illegal goods, was caught in the act during a sale. Because Saul had built a decent reputation in the circle over the years, Jesse directly brought Walter to Saul's law office.
So how about we get him a real attorney? Man, what the hell is this? This is who he hires?
What? You kidding me? Look, you remember Emilio? Okay, this dude got Emilio off like twice. Okay? Both times, they had him dead to rights, yo, and then poof. Know what I'm saying?
After some persuasion by Jesse, Walter agreed to Jesse's suggestion, but neither of them wanted to show their faces.
They'll flip for it. Call it.
Heads.
So, Walter put on sunglasses and a baseball cap, posing as Badger's uncle, and came to Saul's office, only to be teased by Saul for looking like D.B. Cooper. Saul explained Badger's situation to Walter. When Walter learned that the DEA wanted to use Badger to track down Heisenberg, the maker of the blue product, He was terrified. Walter wanted to bribe Saul to get Badger out, but because the two were unfamiliar, Saul did not agree. Actually, it was because Walter's offer was too low. At this point, Walter was willing to do anything to protect himself. So, after Saul got off work, Walter and Jesse directly kidnapped him, because Saul had once been kidnapped by Tuco and taken to the desert. He thought he had been captured again by the Mexican Salamanca family, so he nervously started speaking broken Spanish.
Por favor, yo soy abogado, abogado.
In the face of life and death, Jimmy spoke the same way, but he didn't know that this time he was being kidnapped by his own countrymen.
No, it wasn't me, it was Ignacio, he's the one! Oh no! Lalo didn't send you? No, Lalo?
Who?
Oh, thank God!
A nervous Saul was relieved to see that the two men didn't know Lalo. During the negotiation, Walter's coughing gave away their identity. After the negotiations were settled, Saul came to their RV. Seeing the various chemical lab equipment in the RV, the sharp-witted Saul deduced that these two were the manufacturers of the blue illicit substance, and that the middle-aged man in front of him was the Heisenberg the DEA had been searching for. Seeing the money-making opportunity, Saul immediately smelled profit. This was simply a money tree, and Saul couldn't wait to get back to work. However, just as Walter was about to start the RV, it wouldn't start. Walter figured out the temperament of the RV, realizing it was just a matter of the engine idling too long. It just needed a break. Walter pulled the keys out of the car and it went dark, since it was too quiet inside. Jesse initiated some conversation.
Who's Lalo?
Who?
Lalo. Thought some dude named Lalo sent us. You seem pretty freaked out. Never heard of no Lalo on the street.
Lalo was a shadow over Saul's life, so he hurriedly changed the subject. At this moment, Walter tried to start the RV again, and luckily, it didn't stall. Thus, Saul, Walter, and Jesse reached their first cooperation. Afterward, Saul had Mike investigate Walter and Jesse's backgrounds. To Saul's surprise, Walter turned out to be a high school chemistry teacher who also had cancer. Saul worried about Walter's condition. If Walter died, he might lose a lot of money, but Mike said Walter was an amateur. Even if he didn't die, he'd eventually be caught by the police. However, Saul didn't care about that. He knew that the illegal product Walter was making was top-notch and was spreading throughout the streets. Watching Saul's attitude towards Walter, Mike advises him not to deal with people like that. Saul agrees on the outside, but inside he's already feeling the urge. In the end, Saul couldn't resist and went to Walter's school to pitch his services. He knew Walter's needs, especially with some ill-gotten money that Walter would definitely need to launder. Although Walter was wary of Saul's visit, Saul didn't mind, because he believed Walter would come to him sooner or later.
So if you want to make more money and keep the money that you make, better call Saul.
With the rise of Heisenberg in Breaking Bad, Saul also had to prepare for his own escape. Both he and Walter ended up in Ed's underground waiting room. However, when Ed came to get Saul ready to leave, Walter forcefully insisted that Saul stay and help him with his revenge. But Saul said he was no longer a lawyer. He hoped to go into hiding and open a Cinnabon store in Omaha. A few months later, Saul, now renamed Gene, achieved this dream. His life turned into a monotonous black and white existence. He worked discreetly, spoke to few people, and feared being recognized. If he thought someone was watching him, he would become anxious and uneasy. Luckily, it was just a misunderstanding, and Gene breathed a sigh of relief. Gene was very bored at home alone at night. After ensuring no one was outside, he would close the curtains, take out his treasured advertisement DVDs, and watch them. The reflection in the lens showed a splash of color from the ads because, in Gene's eyes, only Saul's life was exciting. At work, although Gene greeted his colleagues, they never got to know him well. It was all superficial. One day after work, Gene went to throw out the trash and accidentally got locked in the garbage room. Seeing the emergency alarm, he didn't dare press it, fearing that a policeman might recognize him. After knocking on the door for a long time with no response, Gene had no choice but to sit and wait for someone to open the door. Gene waited for several hours until an old man came to throw out the trash. Gene walked out without saying a word, but he didn't forget to leave his mark. Saul Goodman was here. However, he ultimately couldn't avoid being found. One day, Gene took a cab home and saw an Albuquerque sign in the Omaha taxi. Remember, The two places are over 1,000 kilometers apart. Gene noticed the driver staring at him, seemingly recognizing him as Saul Goodman from Albuquerque. To be safe, Gene got out of the car halfway. He thought that would be the end of it, but a few days later, the cab driver Jeff found him. Jeff recognized that the man in front of him, Gene, was actually Saul Goodman. Gene denied it, but Jeff insisted that he was indeed the famous Saul. Jeff also said that he was proud of the fact that he'd hauled customers who were more famous than Saul. Seeing that Jeff didn't seem inclined to report him, Gene reluctantly delivered Saul's iconic line.
Better call Saul.
What? I can't even hear that. Once again, and do the point.
Better call Saul.
Jeff was thrilled to have Saul finally acknowledge his identity and said that if Saul ever needed anything, he should call him, and he'd be there. After Jeff left, Gene immediately contacted Ed. They exchanged their secret codes, and just as Gene was about to place the order, he suddenly changed his mind. Instead of running away to another place and facing similar situations again someday, he decided to handle it himself. Soon, Gene found his breakthrough. He used his usual tricks to strike up a conversation with Jeff's mother. When Jeff got home, he saw that Gene had already become quite familiar with his mother. This scared Jeff a lot. Worried about his mother's safety, Jeff didn't reveal Gene's true identity. Instead, he found an opportunity to pull Gene aside and ask him what his intentions were. Little did Jeff know, he was falling into Gene's trap step by step. Gene hit Jeff's weak spot and said he could help him make a lot of money. Hearing about making money, Jeff, who was struggling financially, had no reason to refuse. Gene first managed to befriend the mall's security personnel by bringing them cinnamon rolls from his shop. Previously, Gene had fainted once, and thanks to their timely rescue, he was out of danger, and that's how Gene and Frank got to know each other better. Gene also noted how long it took Frank to eat the cinnamon rolls. Once this was settled, Gene went to the mall to pick out the expensive items and mentally noted the distance between each item. He then hurried to the restroom to write down this information. Based on this, Gene's team recreated the mall's layout in the suburbs. The next step was to train Jeff to retrieve the target items within the specified time. After multiple rounds of practice, Jeff quickly reached the required standard. They hid Jeff in a delivery crate and purposely had it delivered to the mall entrance. Since it was too late to move it, the mall staff compromised and allowed them to leave it until the next morning before opening hours. This played right into Gene's plan. That night, Gene, as usual, brought cinnamon rolls to the security room. When Frank was about to start his meal, Gene signaled Jeff to start the operation. Jeff followed Gene's training precisely and smoothly retrieved the target items. However, just as he was about to finish and leave, he suddenly slipped and fell. Seeing that Frank had finished the last bite of his cinnamon roll while there was still no sign from Jeff, Gene started to panic.
What am I doing?
What? Look at me. I don't know. I don't know. Oh, Jesus.
Gene?
You have a wife, right, Frank?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
She's waiting for you.
Gene distracted Frank by engaging him in random chatter. It wasn't until Jeff finally got back on track, took everything, and hid in the restroom that Gene breathed a sigh of relief. After the successful operation, Jeff was overjoyed. Their loot was worth tens of thousands of dollars. At this moment, Gene poured cold water on their heads. Gene pointed out that their crimes were enough to land them in prison for 10 years. If they exposed Gene's true identity, they would be dragged down with him. This was Gene's real purpose. Compared to the cost of seeking Ed's help, Gene's maneuver significantly lowered his expenses and eased his worries. As a result, Gene felt much more relaxed at work. Once again, he had used his skills to achieve a big win. As if Saul had returned, he picked out a stylish black and white patterned shirt in the mall, then held it up and looked at himself in the mirror. At this moment, Gene was reminiscing about Saul's glory days, but he knew those were in the past. Now, as long as he avoided getting caught by the police, he would consider himself lucky.